PFOS is a compound that was used in industrial production and firefighting. It is similar to PFOA, which has been linked to problems in Hoosick Falls and Petersburg. Newburgh was able to switch to a new water source after the problem was discovered, but cleaning up the contamination is a big task, and this water source, that's not really a long-term solution. Today's decision means the Department of Defense will have to pay for cleanup. Joining me now to talk more about the situation is Riverkeeper's Dan Shapley. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, Liz.
It's fortuitous that you are here because this is an announcement that the DC made just today that it has designated this area a Superfund site, and this is something that you had been calling for. So I guess you got what you wanted.
This is one important step. For Newburgh, this means, as you said, that now we can be assured that the cleanup will be paid for, and not just the cleanup, but health screening, including blood testing, which is something very important that we can talk about, and really watershed restoration, because in Newburgh you have a drinking water supply that is poorly protected and needs protection. So
yeah, it's basically a lake. It's like an open lake, pretty much. You can walk right up to it and just sort of look into it, as U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer was just there. I mean, he was talking about legislation. Is that necessary now? At the federal level?
This designation, the Superfund law is quite powerful, so we should, with this, be able to have some assurance that the cleanups will be paid for. Of course, we have to be watchdogs, we always do. We have to watch that our state agencies and our federal agencies are going to follow through and do the right thing for the people of Newburgh and for the environment. And that's what people like me and people like you, that's what we do. What it does is should ensure that the money will be there, and now the Department of Defense is one of those responsible parties. There could be others. It could be on the DEC to find those other responsible parties. It could be on the Department of Defense to find those other parties. But now the mechanism is in place to ensure we can go out and do the work and recoup the costs.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the big and sort of scary question is how many other of these are there? I mean, PFOA, we heard about Hoosick Falls, okay, we're getting it, we understand Saint-Gobain, where it came from, it was Teflon, it was a coating, it's not used anymore. All right, then PFOS pops up, and, you know, then the state is like, oh, well, we better address that. I mean, what else is out there aside from these two related but not, you know, they're similar and they're bad for you, I think is just, in short, they're bad for you.
Yeah, I mean, these are related. They're in the same family of chemicals. They're very closely associated with one another, and they're so toxic, in fact, that a couple drops in 20 Olympic pools is enough to violate the EPA drinking water standard. So that's an indication of just how bad they are and how much science we actually have showing that.
But why is it taking this long to get to a point where we're classifying them as dangerous and increasing, or rather lowering, the threshold that's appropriate?
Yeah, I mean, maybe if you really want to get at the startling thing, there are probably others out there that we just don't know about. We don't know the acronym for them yet. We haven't gotten used to pronouncing these things. But we have a very slow-moving bureaucracy when it comes to regulating chemicals and getting to the point where we're at today, where the state has the legal mechanism through those emergency regulations it passed after Hoosick Falls to actually move to a Superfund cleanup for a place like Newburgh.
Well, I know that you're also, as you mentioned, calling for blood tests, but I mean, it sort of begs the question, I mean, maybe we should all get tested. I mean, I guess the thing is, we don't know, right? There's so many environmental exposure possibilities out there. Every day you're walking past or drinking from or sitting in or consuming something, and we're just not there yet.
I mean, we're not pristine. The environment is not pristine. That's still a difference between what we see in a Newburgh or a Hoosick Falls, where there is a discrete source that has really increased dramatically the exposure to a significant population. In the case of Newburgh, 30,000 people. It's a big city. And every one of those people, pregnant mothers, developing children, everybody has been exposed to this for an unknown amount of time, but years, maybe decades.
Why have we not seen blood tests yet? I mean, we saw them in Hoosick Falls. Why have we not seen them in Newburgh?
Well, the important thing now, we have, there's really no reason not to. There never has been a reason not to, but now there's a funding source designated. This designation says we know we're going to get this paid for, and so now it really has to happen. So we expect to see, we will be expecting to see that the state moves very quickly to start blood testing here in Newburgh. Now, we're concerned that they might not, and we're going to continue to call for it and fight for it until they do, because it's the only fair thing. It's the only thing to do that has an element of justice to it. I mean, you have two small villages that have had this testing. You have a large city here that needs it as well. There's no difference between them. They've all been exposed to a chemical.
Is there a, I mean, I guess from a liability standpoint, is it better or worse to have the government actually be the potentially liable party? I mean, Saint-Gobain is a private entity with deep pockets, but can't fight forever in terms of liability and covering people's medical costs. That's what the main problem is. I mean, paying for the cleanup and paying for a clean drinking water source, et cetera. But in the long term, we just don't know how many people will be impacted negatively. The government, is it better or worse to have the government be in charge of making people whole to the degree that they can get whole?
Well, certainly there's a concern about conflict of interest, because you'll have a state agency, the DEC, or the Department of Health making decisions that are going to impact potentially the Department of Transportation, which owns the property, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, which operates the commercial airport, the state militia, which is the New York Air National Guard, or the Department of Defense. So they're all government agencies watching each other, which is, again, the reason why it's so important to have watchdogs like Riverkeeper and others. And in fact, we raised concerns about this particular, the Air National Guard base, way back in early 2015.
Not specifically on PFOS, but yes, on PFOS.
But recognizing that the very outfall pipes that we recognized needed attention by the DEC are the same that are being looked at as the major sources of PFOS.
So also, I mean, the state is in a mode where it's just responding, and as you noted, playing catch up, right? I mean, in part because there's a lot of finger pointing going on. Well, the EPA lowered things in midstream, and now we're reacting, and whatever. We can put aside whose fault it is, and now the question is, well, what more can we do to protect people, not just in Newburgh, but in other places that are inevitably going to crop up with this problem?
Right. So I should say, first of all, that the DEC's actions in Newburgh have been largely exemplary in that they have aggressively investigated the sources. We've met with them and suggested additional testing, and they've largely, taken those.
So they learned from Hoosick Falls.
I think
is what
so.
You're saying.
And they have, arranged for an interim supply of drinking water, so people are drinking clean water today at no cost to the city, and they've arranged for filtration to be installed, in as timely way as you can do with a big filtration system. So they've taken a number of important steps in addition to this very important one today. That said, the blood testing is essential, as I've said, and watershed restoration is really key for Newburgh particularly. You have, as you said, a reservoir. I mean, it's not unusual to have reservoirs as a drinking water source. That's New York City, right? But we have extremely well-protected reservoirs for New York City.
Yeah, Ashokan. It's also in the middle of nowhere. Not in the middle of nowhere. I have ridden across it many times, but it's nowhere near New York City. Right? It's not in an urban area.
And it's a great point. And yet New York City has certain powers to protect its own drinking water that Newburgh doesn't have, that most communities in New York State do not have, because the State Department of Health has not enacted specific regulations allowing them to have jurisdiction outside of their borders to protect their drinking water. So that's one thing. It's a very key thing, but that's one thing that Newburgh needs going forward.
Can Newburgh afford it, though? I mean, we're talking about a city that's in a little bit of a financial disarray.
It won't be the same model as New York City, where New York City has deep enough pockets to do everything, but you could imagine a number of scenarios. Let's say that there was some mechanism to establish a stormwater fee on the many parking lots that are in Newburgh's drinking water supply, for instance. And that would provide an incentive for those entities to reduce their stormwater discharges, to reduce their tax bill, and you could use that fund to invest in restoration efforts, as one example. But there's no mechanism, there's no enabling legislation or mechanism that would allow that kind of fund to happen.
So unfortunately we're almost out of time, but I guess that was going to be my next question, which is, obviously this is a conversation that's only just getting started, not just about Newburgh or Hoosick Falls or Petersburg or what have you, but we're going to see hearings. The Assembly's having general water quality hearings, and then we're going to see a Hoosick Falls hearing. We learn on August 30th the Senate's going to hold in Hoosick Falls. What more could the legislature do? They're addressing the lead issue also in mandating water testing for schools, but what more should it do, taking it up as first order of business in January?
Well, what we've found is that there are a lot of laws on the books that actually amount to a pretty comprehensive approach to protecting source waters. There's some things we could do to improve them. But if we can just coordinate efforts and actually give resources and direction to the DOH and the DEC to actually do what's already in the law, we would see vast improvements in the protection of drinking water supplies across the state.
Well, hopefully the indication that the state is learning from its, I'll say, mistakes is a good one, and we will continue to have the discussion. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Liz.